As a recruiter, I hear a lot of really bad resume advice, but because you clicked on this video, you're not going to make any of those mistakes. And one of the most common pieces of really bad resume advice is that your resume is the most important part of your job search. Spoiler alert, it is not. I made a whole video explaining exactly why this is, but basically, you don't need to spend hours revising your resume and creating hundreds of different versions. Instead, you should be spending the majority of your time focusing on networking and practicing and honing your interview skills. Those two pieces are going to matter way more than your resume. The second piece of bad advice when it comes to resume writing is that you should use a creative and unique format to stand out. You should basically never do this unless you are applying for some type of creative role like graphic design. Other than that, everyone else should be using a pretty standard resume template. Remember, simpler is always better when it comes to your resume, so please do not spend money on these weird resume templates that have a bunch of different colors, make you use your photo, or have any of those star ratings when you need to rate your skills. Even though these resume templates are the first thing that come up when you do a Google search, do not use these. Instead, you're going to want to use your accomplishments and your experience to stand out, not a fancy template or different colors. If you're finding these tips to be helpful so far, make sure you click subscribe down below, and if you're already subscribed, share this video with a friend who is working on their resume right now. Alright, the next piece of bad resume advice is that you should not put on your resume if you were laid off. This is actually really bad advice because especially with all of these tech layoffs that are happening right now, you're going to want to explain why you have a gap on your resume. And if you don't put why, the recruiter or the hiring manager is going to assume the worst. And the worst is that you were fired due to poor performance. Now, if you were laid off because your company was impacted by the COVID-19 virus or because of all of the massive tech layoffs that are happening right now, it doesn't mean that you are a bad employee. And that's why it's okay to put that you were laid off, because as long as you weren't fired, you are still a good candidate. The next piece of bad advice is that you should put all of your work experience on your resume. As a general rule of thumb, if you have 0 to 10 years of work experience, your resume should usually be just 1 page. If you have more than 10 years of work experience, you should be at 2 pages, but no more. The only exception for this is if you're applying for research-based roles where you need to highlight all of your research and publications and maybe even some of the patents that you've covered. And then you can probably go to a 3rd page, but you really don't need anything longer than that for most jobs. Now, this is especially true if you've had the same type of job for your entire career. At that point, you need to be really selective as to what goes on your resume, because if all of your experience is basically in accounting, then you don't need to have 4 pages of your accounting jobs, because we know that you've been working in accounting the whole time. So you should really be focusing on just the most premium accomplishments or the most impressive accomplishments that should go on the resume. Now, for those of you who are doing a career switch, when you're updating your resume, you only want to include the transferable skills on there. Even if you've done a bunch of different roles, you only want to talk about the roles that are actually relevant. Don't include anything that is not relevant, because it will make it look worse that you are extremely unqualified for the job that you are trying to switch to. And you also shouldn't include all of your work experience if you want to avoid potential age bias. The next piece of bad resume advice is that you should include hobbies and interests on your resume. Do not include these. These are basically just a waste of space. People say that you should include these because it's a way to stand out in case the recruiter or the hiring manager shares the same interest in you, and then you two would be able to bond over that connection. But just remember, this is a resume, which is supposed to talk about your work experience and explain why you are qualified, not why you are fun to hang out with outside of work. They're going to learn that through the interviews, but you'll never get to interview if you're wasting space talking about useless hobbies. Now, here's another really common piece of advice that always gets people in trouble, and that is that you need to be very literal when you are writing your job titles on your resume. Now, you shouldn't lie about your job titles, but you should also have a level of self-awareness if your company gave you a job title that does not match the industry standard. I was once coaching somebody who had a formal written job title as a product manager, but when I asked them what they were doing in their day-to-day responsibilities, they were actually in a customer success role. They were basically doing sales. They were not a product manager working on new features. Also, keep in mind that a lot of jobs have a multitude of different responsibilities that can span across different types of jobs. This can be very helpful when you are trying to do a bit of a career switch. For example, let's say you work in sales operations and you actually manage some of the sales and marketing campaigns as a part of your program. So in this case, you are actually qualified to apply for a marketing program manager role, but you do not have a marketing program manager formal job title at your company. Your job title is sales operations. But because you actually manage marketing programs, you could put that your job title is a sales marketing program manager. In this specific scenario, if you had applied with your literal job title, you would never get an interview even though you are qualified. Now, I know you're probably thinking if you modify your job title on your resume, you're gonna fail the background check. Now, I can tell you that this is not true. Another piece of advice to ignore is that you should apply to as many jobs as possible. You should use the shotgun approach. No, you should definitely not do this. In fact, you should only apply to 10 to 20 jobs per week, no more than that. You want to apply to a small sample size of jobs and then wait a week to see what the response rate is like so you can judge if your resume needs more work or if it's good enough. The general response rate that you should be targeting is around 10%. Now, on the other hand, if you utilize the shotgun approach and apply to 50 or 100 jobs a week with a bad resume or a unoptimized resume, you've now just rejected yourself from 50 to 100 companies. And now you won't be able to apply there for a while. The ATS system will automatically reject you because in the past it knows that you were not qualified for the position. So instead, you need to adapt and listen to the market. And that's why you shouldn't apply to that many jobs all at once. Make sure you can optimize your resume first and then apply with volume. The next thing you should never do is put an objective on your resume or write an objective statement on your resume. Instead, just utilize a summary. The objective statement is pretty much useless because they know that you want a job because you applied for the job. Now, another piece of bad advice is for folks who are trying to do a career switch. You should not use a functional resume, which is what a lot of the Google searches, blogs, and career coaches on YouTube will tell you to use when you are doing a career switch. Recruiters hate looking at functional resumes. We don't like to look at functional resumes because we have no idea what your current job title is, which is probably the most important thing. We need to know that you're doing a job that's relevant or at least transferable to what we want. We don't need to see the highlighted skills that you believe are transferable. We really want to know what your current job is today, how long you've been doing it, and how recent and relevant these transferable skills are. So instead, you need to use a hybrid resume format. You can watch this full video that I have on the channel explaining what is a hybrid resume and why you should use it. Alright, so now you know what not to do when you are working on your resume this year. And why don't you put down in the comments some good or bad resume advice so that we can help the whole community. Thank you all for watching, and don't be afraid to shake things up.